Are you going places or left behind without a travel companion? Listen to how you can travel more independently. Dr. Mary Travelbest will bring you the best tips and her travel mistakes so you can benefit.
Welcome to Dr. Mary Travelbest's Independent Travel Guide. This is a special episode for women like you who need a little extra support traveling the world, one woman at a time. And we're going to talk about independent travel in China from 1988 to now. This is part 2. In this episode, the FAQ is, how can I meet people when I travel without anyone else in my group? The destination is China, 1988 to now, part 2. And the lesson learned is my bad directions. Some travel advice is about clearing your mind of distractions. So now the FAQ. How do I meet people when I travel these days? It seems that most people just want to keep to themselves, and I don't want to be a pest. This is a question that I got asked often. So here is my answer. It's pretty simple. The golden rule applies here. Do unto others as you would like them to do to you. Now, if they were traveling like you are, would they want someone to smile and be friendly? Yes, indeed they would. In many ways, you are more approachable to others when you're not in a group, just on your own. So you begin with a kind word, a smile, and a cheerful hello in the language you know best. See if they respond to your greeting, and listen with your eyes as well as the ears. Often people are shy and not ready to open up to strangers. So the fastest you are no longer a stranger, the easier a conversation may occur. Sometimes you just need to give others peace and quiet, but most of the time, people want to engage with you if you are willing to go at least halfway toward meeting them and do it first. And now for today's destination. We're going to talk about China, 1988 to now. We're going to talk about cities Beijing, Shanghai, and Guangzhou, China. First, Beijing. So I talked about how I got to Hong Kong, and now I'm going to share how I flew solo from San Diego to Hong Kong to Beijing. At the time, Beijing had just a single airport with one terminal that could handle about 12 planes. The airport was under construction, and things have markedly improved for that capital city. They just built the world's largest airport in the southern part of Beijing in 2019 for a cost of $11.4 billion. Back then, I was the only American that I noticed at the time. I took a taxi to my hotel, the Great Wall Sheraton, and that was impressive and very modern. The first thing I did was take a hot bath because I had no hot water since I arrived in the country several days prior. I really needed that after such a long trip. I located a Chinese tourism office where a friend of a friend worked. I passed a note inside the building to someone walking along who was going inside, and that was in English. And I was very surprised when 5 minutes later, the person, the friend of the friend, an official tour guide came out and met me. He offered to give me a full day's tour, semi-private. There was just one other person. And so the three of us spent a full day starting at the Great Wall, seeing the tombs, the Forbidden City, the Summer Palace, and behind the scenes, then having lunch and dinner also together. I was able to see the remains of the body of China's leader, Deng Xiaoping, who had died the year before. His body was in a glass enclosure, and it was on display in Tiananmen Square. Now, this was 6 months before the historical protests against the government in 1988. This friend of a friend, my friend now, he had special privileges to visit behind the scenes so I could see what few people did. I saw the riches, the gifts that others had given to China over the centuries. It was so impressive to see history come to life here. Having the introduction from a friend made a big difference in my trip. In Beijing, basically everything looked drab green at the time. No one wore colorful clothing, and it was very cold in January. Now, here's what was interesting. The panda exhibit in the zoo was empty, with no one in line to see them. Now, in San Diego at the same time, people were waiting for hours to see the pandas at the world famous San Diego Zoo. What a contrast that was. Also, during the time of this travel, there was a hepatitis breakout during my visit, and there was no vaccine available to get. I was told not to shake hands and not to eat out. However, I was all by myself. I had no choice. I had to eat out. And there were no places to buy snacks like a grocery store. There were no markets where you could buy in bulk, not a corner 7-Eleven, not then anyway. My second hotel in Beijing was overlooking Tiananmen Square. I could walk there and spend time videotaping the sights and hearing the sounds of the people. If I was going back to Beijing today, I would spend more time near Tiananmen Square. I would listen to the conversations and learn more about the culture. At this time, we can't visit due to COVID restrictions, but I hope that the opportunities start again soon. Now for Shanghai. In Shanghai, I found a room and booked at the Jinjiang Hotel. I had the names of two American women, Robin and Marty, from my college professor. They were his students previously. I went to see them at the Peace Hotel. They were running a clothing company as CEO and CFO. They ran a business with clients like REI and Patagonia as their clients. They knew logistics and shipping, so they were very successful. And they were very friendly and invited me to join their group of expats in Shanghai, a large group of them. I remember being in a store shopping for souvenirs and being approached by a local man who spoke English. He had relatives in Seattle and was hoping to move there someday. He invited me to visit his home in Shanghai, but I had to be very quiet in order to sneak me in. There were neighborhood watch people who would report me. I did visit his house and met his wife and children for some time. It was a bit scary, but it was really very brave and gave me a lot of insight to learn firsthand about the culture, the lifestyle, and the interests of Chinese people. Back to eating out, what I did was when I got the menu, I really couldn't read it. So I would just point to something that others were eating and ordered that. I had no idea what it was. Now, this was January 1988, and the city of Shanghai was still small in acres, and just 5 minutes out of the city was a farming community. The tallest buildings were maybe 10 to 20 stories, but when I went back 30 years later, the skyline was totally different. Now there were several dozen buildings over 100 stories high. The streets had cars instead of bicycles, and there was commerce everywhere you looked, and a convenience store on every corner. I'd like to also talk about Guangzhou. I flew from San Diego to Guangzhou by myself again. The city was very progressive. I taught mobile marketing to university students, including many of the case studies that were in my new textbook. But they ended up teaching me a lot about apps, including how they used WeChat for all of their purchases and banking. Also, they never carried any money. I had the pleasure to eat all of my meals with them on campus and went to the teacher's lounge to play ping pong at night. I also spent time by myself for a few days in Guangzhou. To wrap this episode up on China, I just want to say the cities in China have a city each within them. So when you visit, you can look for the old city, which is usually just a few blocks away from those new skyscrapers. Now for today's lesson learned. It's about giving bad directions. I gave a friend the wrong directions. I drew a map for them of where to go. When I put the wrong signposts on them, my map had the water on the west when it should have been on the east side. How embarrassed I was. That was a wake-up call for me to take a geography lesson at the community college. I'm glad I did. And if you struggle with this, there's hope for both of us. Here is some travel advice. Clear your mind of distractions and enjoy putting your toes in the sand, listening to chirping birds and tasting a new flavor of where you are now. Be in the present as much as you can during your travels. I want to bring meaning to your travel. So send me your travel tip or question to my Facebook page or group or Instagram, Twitter, blog, YouTube, or Dr. Mary at drmarytravelbest.com. Maybe you'll see your tips in my next travel book on independent destinations.
What's on your travel bucket list? Tell the doctor and her team of women who travel the world seeking the very best. Dr. Travel Best, that is.